From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Welcome back. I'm Paul Gigot with the Wall Street Journal here with Joe Sternberg and Kim Strassel. And let's listen to President Biden make his case against Republicans on the economy this week.
Republicans are determined to hold the economy hostage, either given to their demands on Social Security and Medicare, which millions of Americans rely on and earned and paid for, or Republicans are going to crash the economy. Let me be clear. I will not cut Social Security. I will not cut Medicare. No matter how hard I am, I'm never going to give in. It's outrageous.
Well, there's President Biden standing up a couple of classic straw men in the field and mowing them down with great authority. Social Security and Medicare. Oh, cuts. I'd love it if the political class would actually undertake to reform those entitlements, which are ultimately going to be unaffordable in their current form. But the Republicans are fleeing so fast from that argument, Joe, you can't see their backsides. They're running so fast. I mean, there's nobody who's talking about Social Security, Medicare. I mean, they can point to Kevin McCarthy saying something oblique when he's talking about the debt ceiling and spending and so on. But there's no chance that Republicans are going to take on entitlements, in my view.
Yes, and I think that demonstrates how vulnerable President Biden and the Democrats understand that they are on the economy in general if they have to devise such a transparent falsehood, this form of a straw man on these entitlements in order to try to gin up some kind of electoral fear of what the Republican agenda might be. I mean, if anything, we're probably going to find ourselves, unfortunately, in a situation where if there is a Republican wave in the election and the GOP performs very well in the House, maybe even retakes the Senate, we're still going to be in the situation where we might have to dial back the expectations a bit, because the reality is that as long as President Biden is in office and has surrounded himself with a bunch of far-left progressive advisors and, that sort of people staffing the regulatory agencies, I think there might be limited scope for the Republicans to do damage control on the economy. I mean, that doesn't mean that it'll be a fruitless pursuit or that it won't be better to have people of a more responsible approach to the economy in Congress than not. But I think the problem you run into in this situation is that by design, the U.S. government operates very slowly, and it can be tough to turn that ship around.
Yeah, the debate over what will happen to the economy if Republicans do take Congress is going to be interesting, particularly if there is a recession next year, which all of Wall Street seems to think there will be. Well, we don't know if there will be. We know it's not going to be a terrific year anyway in the economy because interest rates are going to have to rise considerably higher than they are now if the Fed wants to get control of inflation. And they're likely to increase those rates. And we had Kim, I know you and Joe were both in our meeting this week with Kevin Brady, who is retiring from Congress but has headed up the Ways and Means Committee for the Republicans for several years as chairman and now as ranking member, and has a pretty good sense of where the GOP conference is on economics. And he laid out an agenda for us that they'd like to undertake, starting with expiring provisions of the 2017 tax cut and tax reform. Some of those begin to expire in January. And the most important economically is arguably the 100% expensing provision, which is going to start to phase down in 2023. And they would love to be able to extend that. It's not terribly expensive, something like $25 billion on an annual basis. But Kevin Brady was saying that the cost of the Democrats, the price that they're asking for this, would be an extension of the child care tax credit, which is expiring and will cost $125 billion. And that price is going to be just too high. So it may be that, as Joe suggests, at least in the short term here, until we see how the recession goes, if it does, that there's going to be gridlock and not much else.
Yeah, there are specifically 3 provisions that are going to begin to phase out at the end of the year. Republicans, when they initially passed that bill in 2017, they structured it that way just to kind of make all the numbers work. But these are immensely important provisions for business, and all the more important given what we're seeing in terms of these GDP numbers and slowing investment and slowing growth. The cost of extending them is not much. It's about $20 billion. But as you say, what the Democrats want in return is about $120 billion. So it's a huge ask. It's not likely to happen. So then you get to the question of what can Republicans do? And their best bet is when they take over, if they take over and they get control of the budget process, you can begin to put some policy writers in there, make some changes to taxation, and often you can grease these through the system because everyone is also trying to get their spending priorities through, and it's the one place Congress still manages to get some things done. But it's going to be a while before they get their hands on that process. I do not hold out a lot of hope for the lame duck. Sometimes when parties are thumped in an election, lame ducks can be places of progress, but I don't necessarily see Democrats being open to that. They seem that they'll be more, I think, bitter if they don't win, and they'll use the lame duck to try to jam through any last priorities they have. So it could be some time. I think the biggest thing Republicans will be able to do, and this will be helpful, is simply to put up a stop sign to more spending, which really would be more damaging to the economy. They're not likely to get tons of recognition for that, but it would be helpful just in terms of trying to slow what has been, I think, government-fueled demand.
Of course, to even pass a budget which would allow them to use the so-called reconciliation process, which would allow them to pass something through Congress on a simple majority vote as opposed to the 60-vote filibuster. To do that, they're going to have to be able to pass a budget in both houses. They would have to take the Senate as well as the House. People now, I think, expect the House to go Republican. The question is by how much. And in the Senate, while it's been moving in the Republican direction, it still could go either way. And without that, then that control of both houses, there's even less that they can do. They can, start to negotiate overspending. And they have the debt ceiling expiration, which Leader McCarthy in the House said that he would like to use to get something out of the administration. Kevin Brady told us that that's also something he thinks that they can use, perhaps to pass some budget reforms. But you heard the president imply that he's not going to allow them to make any real serious cuts, certainly in entitlements, Joe. So it may be the best we can hope for. I repeat, my point is gridlock, unless there is an economic downturn which forces Washington to act.
Well, I don't undersell the benefits of gridlock in this kind of situation, because we've seen what happened when you had one party very aggressively trying to push forward its agenda, and we see where we are. So I think that the Republicans can rack up some wins just by putting up the stop sign that Kim was talking about. I mean, I think that one of the problems that's going to emerge here is that there are two tracks that this Biden agenda has been operating on. One has been the fiscal track with all of the spending, all of the tax policy changes, the tax increases that have been embedded in a lot of these bills that are just so damaging for the economy. And the other track has been the regulatory track, the sort of all of the new restrictions that come in around environmental policy or drilling for energy, that kind of thing. I think that certainly Republicans could be reasonably optimistic that they can do some good, at least putting up the stop sign on some of the worst of the fiscal excesses. But unfortunately, we are going to be in the situation where then that will shift more of the focus onto the regulatory side, where it might be a bit harder for them to notch up a lot of wins from Capitol Hill.
Yeah, the regulatory slowdown is going to take the courts to be able to deter that, because the executive branch has enormous running room on regulations. Never mind that Congress has the power of the purse. It's very difficult for Congress to stop new regulations. All right. Thanks, Joe. Thanks, Kim. Thank you all for listening. We will be back tomorrow, as usual, with another edition of Potomac Watch. And send those cards and letters to pwpodcast@wsj.com. Look forward to hearing from you.